hit the record button and then stop touching any buttons.
It sounds good.
All right, welcome everyone. I am Lauren Hoyt, the Senior Associate Director of College Counseling here at the Hill School, and I'm joined by 3 colleagues from the other side of the desk. I'll let them introduce themselves one by one, and we're happy to see everyone today, and we're going to talk about both the role of demonstrated interest and the role of interviews in the college admissions process. And we're going to talk about that sort of generally, but also how the virus is impacting both of those issues. So Molly, if you can start us off with a quick introduction, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and attending this session with us. We're excited to talk with you more. I'm Molly Bogle. I work at Dickinson College. I've been there for 13 years and am excited to represent the college. It's a small liberal arts college in central Pennsylvania, one of the oldest schools in the nation, well known for its strong commitment and investment in global education and global leadership. We've had a long relationship with the Hill School and certainly have seen some exceptional Hill alums come and do great things at Dickinson.
All right, thank you, Molly. And how about Bruce?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bruce Bunnick. I'm the Director of Admissions at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I've been at Lehigh for 23 years, and over that time, I've sort of worn a number of different hats with regard to recruitment. Lehigh is a research university that's probably best known for its engineering programs and its business programs, although surprisingly the largest enrolled college is in fact arts and sciences. I will say very quickly to the audience, if you're not aware, we did launch a 4th college at Lehigh, the College of Health, ironically against the backdrop of COVID-19, and a lot of the epidemiological aspects of this situation are exactly what we're going to be studying through data science. You hear about flattening the curve and studying the data. Well, that's what College of Health is going to be about in a sort of a global context. So wanted to say that quickly, and thanks for joining us.
Talk about great timing there. That's fantastic. All right, and then Jake.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm actually calling in from upstate New York, from Syracuse University. I've been here 4 or 5 years now myself, I think, maybe closer to 4. But we're a mid-sized research institution, R1, with a kind of liberal arts school feel and the kind of small class sizes of a small place, but the research and entrepreneurship programs of a large place. 10 undergraduate schools, from our Whitman School of Management to our Newhouse School of Public Communications, but 200 majors, 100 minors, lots of different things to study here.
Great, fantastic. So we have, a diversity in terms of the types of institutions, and I appreciate you all 3 joining us today to highlight some of the issues among demonstrated interest in interviews. Just for our audience members, we are going to be using the chat function, and my colleague Megan Toomey is handling chat for us today. So if you have questions as we go along, please put your questions in the chat. You can direct them to everyone or just directly to Megan Toomey. Either way is perfectly fine, and we can stop and answer those questions as we go along. And we certainly will leave time at the end to answer your questions as well. So we're going to kick off talking about demonstrated interest. And so we're going to start with what is demonstrated interest and why is it important? So I'm going to turn to Jake from Syracuse, if you can handle that one. Start us off.
Yeah, I think I can. So demonstrated interest, essentially, I guess putting it really simple, is it's a mechanism to make sure that you understand the likelihood a student's going to enroll in your institution. And so a lot of institutions and colleges use it to say, get a better sense of, if they admit a particular student, how likely they are to commit and join them in the next academic year. The reason that's important is it allows colleges to have a better understanding of yield and how many students, if they admit them, will actually come, which in turn helps them shape the class and make sure that they hit just the right amount and number of students they want for their programs, instead of over-enrolling or under-enrolling. And so there's a lot of different ways to show that you are expressing demonstrated interest in a particular institution. I know that we're going to talk in a little bit about what that looks like now, but some of the more traditional ways could include an interview or a campus visit, could be emailing with a representative, could be visiting the rep when they come to your school, or taking time to chat with them in other capacities at a fair or in events like this one.
Mhm. Great. Yeah, speaking of what types of demonstrate interest are out there, Molly, what are you all looking at right now? How has that changed for you, that students can't visit you on campus? And really, for a lot of students at the Hill School, because we're boarding, it's hard to get out and visit. And so some of the tips and ways that they can show that demonstrated interest might be true pandemic or no pandemic, right? What else can they be doing other than visiting?
Yeah, great question, Lauren. I think this is relevant to consider, again, no matter what reality we're in, no matter what the new normal is, what demonstrated interest really is demonstrated understanding. And so if you think about it in that way and in that term, that you are demonstrating that you are doing things to understand this school. And you're doing that because you're making an informed decision as to if you will apply, and then ultimately, if you're admitted, if you will enroll. And so Jake's point is exactly that. We want to understand your sense of a place, and we can capture that through demonstrated interest. But again, I'm going to challenge you to think of it as demonstrated understanding. So what can you do to understand a school? You can engage with the content they send you. You can open the emails they send you, read them, click the links, go to the website. You can reach out to a counselor if that option's available to you, and you can say, hey, look, I'm on your website, or I attended your virtual information session, I took your virtual tour, and I'm really interested in continuing my kind of journey and exploration, and I'd love to talk to a faculty member in your archaeology program. I'd love to talk to a current student. I'd love to connect with an alum. Those are always ways that you can demonstrate interest, or again, demonstrate understanding of an institution. And I think those are relevant, and those are great ways to engage across the board. And think of interest or demonstrate interest as a way to help you better assess your match with an institution. Not a box that you check, but a continued kind of journey of learning about a place and learning about and envisioning your fit with that place. So those are a few of the ways you can always demonstrate interest, again, demonstrate understanding. And then when visits are available, certainly a campus visit, an off-campus reception, we value and care about every single thing you do, and we are looking for every reason to kind of celebrate you in the process. And so anything you do is going to be something we pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So to clarify, do you pay attention to if a student receives an email and they open that and click the links?
So I would tell you that's a pretty passive level of
Yeah.
engagement and interest. And I would say that we're looking more for you as a student to take some ownership of the search. And so really content from you is going to stand out. So for example, if I'm reading your application, I'm going to see any email that you sent me. Any initiative that you took is going to show up in that application. I'm not going to see in the application screen every time you've opened an email, but I can, if I needed to look at that information for whatever reason, I can see that in a student's record in their file. And again, all of this is really used in ways that most advantaged students.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about not checking off a box, right? Not approaching demonstrated interest as, well, I need to do this, this, and this for this institution, and this, and this, right? It is, these are the things that you should be doing in order to research the college, in order to make an informed decision, to have a thoughtful and intentional process. And it just so happens that the colleges are paying attention, right? And they should be. So Bruce, what tips can you give our audience members about how to approach this, and how are you moving forward? How are you going to be looking at demonstrated interest this fall? Do you expect any difference given, what we've been experiencing with the pandemic?
Sure, we expect that given the COVID-19 situation, that it will change the dynamic of demonstrated interest. And I think it will also force colleges and universities to change their definition of demonstrated interest, because from its beginnings, demonstrated interest meant interaction in a physical sense. That is, you're on the campus, you're engaging in some way, shape, or form with being there. It could be an information session, a tour, an interview, maybe a specialized program, et cetera. But I think until we're kind of given this green light to go back to normal, the next maybe for the seniors this year, they might find demonstrated interest to be something to be a bit more challenging. There are some ways, though, and an interesting sort of case study is that when we published decisions this past March, and that is regular decisions. So if you're all aware, regular decision means that the student, if they were admitted, they're under no obligation to enroll. But that's the point where a lot of colleges try to sort of, they know the decisions are out and they're sort of trying to attract those students to the campus. We partnered with an online organization called Wiser to really put all of our visitation opportunities, everything for admitted students in an online setting. We will continue that for the juniors, the high school juniors who are rising seniors, for the sophomores who are rising juniors, et cetera. We will continue that for the next, I think, at least year. That will still offer some version. Even though you could be at the Hill School, we're still going to have some form of online interaction, or if you want to say demonstrated interest, that will continue through the fall. Normally, though, the way that I would recommend, and I think I'm going to kind of dovetail on what Molly and Jake shared, is that demonstrated interest writ large should be part of a meaningful, thoughtful, and thorough investigation of a campus, so that not only do you understand the mission and the kind of the signatures of the place, what it's really like, but you know the dynamic, the ethos, the kinds of students who are there, the level of engagement, et cetera. And you might do it in a passive way. You might not set foot in an admissions office because you know someone's there, or a sibling is on a campus, and so you're doing a lot of homework. But it will change the landscape, is the bottom line, to answer Lauren's question more directly, for at least the next, I would say, 6 months, in terms of the visits and the tours.
Great, thank you. Jake.
Yeah, I think Bruce brought up a really interesting point too, and that's that I think colleges are being increasingly smarter about the opportunities they're affording students to express that demonstrated understanding, as Molly had put it. And sometimes that looks like questions you see on the application or a member page that allows you to talk a little bit about why you're specifically interested in that program or school. And sometimes it's virtual opportunities. But I think the key underlying theme with the virtual programs, and something that's certainly being brought more into the front and center with COVID-19, is that demonstrated interest also has a lot to do with who has the ability to demonstrate that interest. And so for us, we look at it and we say it's a lot harder for a student from California to get to Syracuse than it is for a student from, Rochester. And so for us, I think it's good to note that, there's no single factor that's the be-all, end-all decision maker in an application. And a lot of these institutions will read holistically. And so demonstrated interest, like a lot of other things, is part of that process that helps us understand where our students are coming from, what they think about us, but it also is something you take with a grain of salt to say, okay, like, who can get here and how are we being conscious of that and providing access and support for those students if they can't.
Great, thank you. And you bring up a great point about the supplements, right? That frequently, if you're applying using the Common Application, individual institutions can have a supplement, and the most common short answer question or long question is, why do you want to go to this college? Or a version of that question, right? And that is great demonstrated interest, right? You are answering in specific ways. You are making a compelling argument. These are the things that this college has to offer. These are the things that I'm all about and that I have evidence to suggest that I'm all about. And here is the marriage between those two, right? And some colleges will say, we don't track demonstrated interest in our process. We're not tracking if you visit, if you do all of these things, but we're using that supplement question as our demonstrated interest, as your way of showing us that you get who we are as an institution, and you're, again, making that compelling argument for that fit. And I think, Jake, you bring up a great point too about the access to demonstrated, to a college campus. And I think that what has happened this year with the pandemic and everything going virtual, it's really changed access, right? And within a boarding school context, we have a lot of international students. And they, as in our population, was the population that struggled getting to college campuses. And now they can attend the virtual events if they're recorded or if it works with their time zone. But now it's neat to see that access changing. And so not to put work on the college side, but I do hope to continue to see some of the virtual events because I think it has changed the landscape of access and access to information. So, okay, so Mrs. Toomey, have we received any questions or any comments in the chat box, or are we?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So we're gonna then move on to talking about interviews. I enjoyed putting some beautiful pictures of the Hill School campus, thinking that maybe students are missing their home away from home, so you can enjoy that. So interviews, when is the best time to interview with a college, and what is the purpose of the interview? So Molly, can you kick us off?
I would love to. Yeah. Interviews are such an interesting kind of topic to dig into and understand as an applicant, as a high school student, as an applicant, and honestly, as an admissions team. My day today was filled with retreat sessions for our staff, and the session I just left before coming here was about the interview, in fact. And so we dug into these exact questions. How do we intend to use this? And the thing you'll want to know, of course, is the school using this as an evaluative piece of information, or is it informational? So is it an informational interview or an evaluative interview? If it's evaluative, then the school is going to be assessing match and fit and readiness through that conversation. But even so, it's still a conversation, and you should really approach it as such. Given that, and kind of considering what an interview may intend to do, so getting a sense for your fit, for your readiness, maybe giving you some more information that you wouldn't necessarily get in the info session or on a tour, so opportunity for connection. The best time to interview with a college, I would say, is when you have a pretty solid understanding or foundation of understanding, back to that word, of the school. Because one of the questions, to Lauren's point about that common essay question, why this college, is the interview may ask you to tell the interviewer about your kind of interest in their institution. So have a strong foundation and understanding of the school. And I would tell you, wait until a moment when you feel like you are at your most ready and most prepared. We have some students I know who are eager to interview as early as junior year, and talk with your counselor. You have this incredible resource at the Hill School. Talk with your counselor about if an interview is a right move for you with the school, if they're offered, and when might be a good time for you to complete that. That to me would be kind of critical in terms of timing. And the purpose is, again, for us to better understand you, to hear you from your own voice, to kind of allow you to kind of come to life beyond the application, and to get a sense for your interest, your fit, your readiness for the institution.
Great, thank you, Molly. And you already mentioned sort of the different types of interviews. And so
Hi, Bruce, I did that.
what's that?
I did not read ahead that was coming up.
Yeah, it just comes naturally, right? And Bruce, so maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, about the informational interview and maybe alumni interviews, and what is the role of that?
Sure. I think an interview ought to be at the sort of the end of the investigation. That's sort of the culmination, that you've sort of taken a lot of information in on a campus, and that as a student you're saying this school's clearly on my list. I've put it somewhere on that list, and now I want to sit down with someone individually and have a conversation. One of the things you have to be aware of is that, and I don't know about Molly's and Jake's process on Dickinson or Syracuse's campus or anywhere else, but we typically have a series of questions that we will ask students. And some of those questions will test the student on their knowledge of us and asking them to explain why they're looking at us and what's compelling and what led you to this point, et cetera. But then we also leave some time for the student to share some thoughts with us that I think is a good way to basically tell us more about you, the person, that we can't glean from the application. And so that back and forth communication, I think, is so, it can be so rewarding. One point that I will say, though, and I think this is worth sharing. There was a time in admissions and college admissions where the interview itself was largely thought of as the focal point with demonstrated interest. Like it's everything. It is it. And you know, sometimes I don't want to say decisions would rise and fall in interviews, but it was a big step. These days, I think it's diminished. And I'm not suggesting that anyone should not interview, but if you can't because of your schedule, if you can't because of athletics, if you can't because you've got so many things going on, consider an alumni interview. Colleges and universities will have typically an army of alumni volunteers who might be able to meet with you in a coffee shop or in an online setting, and they will ask you, they will sort of mimic what you will get on the campus, and then they will have an opportunity to write up notes and respond to some of our questions from admissions, and we'll add those to the file. But I think that it could be certainly beneficial. Be aware, though, that there are some colleges that say we only offer alumni interviews. That's it. You know, if you want to come to campus, it's maybe an info session, campus tour. We don't conduct on-campus interviews with the admissions staff. In fact, you sort of don't interact and you don't see the admissions staff. They're behind the curtain, if you will. And they'll only use alumni. So really kind of check it out. And I think that if it doesn't matter, if you don't have to take an assessment of your personality and say, well, I'm gregarious and I'm talkative, et cetera. And so I feel like an interview would be best for me. That's fine. But if you're more reticent, if you're a little bit more shy, et cetera, just know that none of the answers you're going to give are wrong. They're not wrong. Sometimes, you know, people will judge you on your presentation and your posture and your mannerisms and the way that you conduct yourself and how thoughtful you respond, but there's no wrong answers in an interview. So I think that's also worth sharing.
That is all really helpful information. So thank you for that. I think that concept of the interview not being the be all and end all is really important. And sometimes that's such a change a lot of times for how our parents think about what the interview is and the role of the interview from when they were going through the process, and that change that we've seen. And there are colleges that don't offer any types of interviews, either with an admissions counselor or with an alum. And so it's one of those things where it's really important to, as you have narrowed down your college list, to look one by one at what the interview policy is for an individual school. Because there are colleges where you have to request the interview, and when you request the interview, you have to do so by a certain date. And there are ones where you have to send in your application first, and then you get the alumni interview. So there's really a wide range of how colleges handle interviews. And I think that the concept of doing the interview when you're ready, do the interview when you know the institution well enough and when you feel prepared, and your college counselor can help you get ready and can do mock interviews with you or talk you through it, and help you assess when is the right time for you to do the interview so that you can really knock it out of the park, right?
And if I could quickly add on, you have to be a little bit agile when approaching interviews, because some campuses might say we only offer them on campus. And if you're within a reasonable driving distance, we don't offer alumni interviews. So just be agile with approaching interviews as far as where you have to go, what you have to, you know, with whom you'll meet, et cetera. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So Jake, how about what should students do to prepare for the interview ahead of time?
Yeah, I think we've hit on a few things already with research and more, but I do want to echo the point that's been made a little bit, that really interviews are just an opportunity to put your best foot forward. And if you feel that's not a space that you're going to be comfortable in, or that you're going to want to stare at your feet the whole time, you know, it's okay to recognize what your areas of strength are, and design your application and your initiatives and accordingly. And so, don't feel that just because something's offered, it has to be done that way. There's a lot of different ways to get information across to the people reading your application. And it's good to ask questions and understand individual schools' policies as you move through that. So don't be afraid to contact people on this panel or representatives at schools to get a better understanding of how that works for their independent area. But in terms of how you prepare in advance, I think research is really a key one that we've brought up, especially when an interview is evaluative, is you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the school so that the representative can recognize that in you and see why you might be interested in. There's really, to my mind, not much point going and interviewing somewhere if you don't know anything about that place already. It's kind of something you take when you feel, at least evaluative interviews, when you feel like you really understand a place and want to get more out of it. But I think ways to do that are to visit the website, talk to counselors and reps ahead of time. It's also good to, and a lot of schools will tell you what their policies are about these things right off the bat, but it's good to understand what a dress code might look like for an interview. I personally, we don't require anything at Syracuse, but I personally appreciate it when a student makes a little bit of an effort and doesn't show up in pajamas, just because I think you're entering a professional space and it's good to be prepared for that. And I think it's good to come with a list of questions that you might have had in advance. If there's anything that you wanted to know more about or couldn't find on the website, it's a good opportunity. And a lot of interviews will end in the last 5 minutes where the rep will turn it over to you, as I think Bruce was saying earlier, to make sure that if you have any questions for us, we're there to help navigate that space with you as well. I've seen a lot of students also bring their resumes and cover letters, things along those lines to interviews. Some may require it, some may not. Sometimes it's a really useful thing. I personally, it's good to have, and I can always include it in the student's file, but I tend to take that stuff and put it to the side just because I know that if I'm talking to a student and I have their resume in front of me, I'll get distracted and want to read what's on the paper instead of actually have a conversation. And so it's good, as Molly had mentioned earlier, just to remember that that's ultimately what this is at the end of the day, is a conversation. And so it's good to think about what you want to ask, come into it with some level of understanding about the topics, and treat it like you would a professional space. Hopefully that covered a few good ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And how about after the interview? Any thoughts on, do you expect or want to see thank you notes? Oftentimes our parents are asking, does a thank you note have to be, the formal thank you note, or you look, that causes, a level of stress and anxiety, right? And wanting to do the right thing.
It depends for me. I think an
Yeah.
email is always appreciated, as is a physical letter. I think it's good to recognize, what is a good way to do that. We've got some funny horror stories in our office, of course. One student said a thank you by, they went online and found one of our counselors' Facebook pages and photoshopped their face out and put that face on M&Ms and sent us a package of M&Ms with that counselor's face on them. One of the most scary moments of my entire life. Great gesture, maybe not the way to express thank you, right? Or sometimes you get these, but when you get a letter in the mail or when you get an email, I think it says to us that you were appreciative of the opportunity and that you listened and took things away from it. Particularly the thank you letters that stick out to me are the ones that will reference something that we talked about in the interview. And then that student really stays with you and sticks in your mind, and doesn't matter if it's a letter or an email to me. I know Bruce wants to go.
No, I'm sorry, Jake. I think they're all great points. I will simply say, and perhaps I'm showing my age here, in my book, a handwritten note doesn't mean you have to do it all the time, but I think that literally handwriting is becoming a lost art form. And so that's a little bit of showing my age and a little bit of a vent. So on those occasions where I do receive those little handwritten cards, thank you so much, it was a pleasure meeting you, etc. Personally, I think it's a nice touch. Does that mean that's going to sway my opinion of the student? Probably
Right.
not, but I just feel like it's a nice touch to having met a person, especially in our technology age where, text messages and social media and everything is sort of the way to communicate. Those little handwritten notes, I think, sometimes come as a surprise, and maybe they come as a surprise as students if they're dropped in the mail. It's almost like looking at the phone on the wall. You're like, I don't know what to do with that thing. How do you operate that thing? I don't, so anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I digress.
I think that's a good point, though, Bruce. And I would say, to kind of jump in there as well. As Jake said, something that references what we talked about in the interview is so valuable, because what you should also consider is that, we all chose this line of work because we are genuinely interested in 17 and 18-year-olds and what you think and what you do and what you'll become and what you are now. And so if you enjoyed that conversation, we probably really enjoyed it as well. And acknowledging it is something that is just a kindness across humans. And so a handwritten note, which definitely, you think about it, I hear from students who I've sent notes to immediately saying, wow, that was really impactful. And so it does make a difference. But at the end of the day, any outreach that represents that you were present in the conversation and you took something away from it, that really is something that will have a lasting impact.
Absolutely. And I also think, one of our greatest resources is time, and acknowledging and thanking someone for taking the time to talk to them, I think is huge, right? And really important that we do that both, when we thank someone for an interview, but also just in general, right? That you spend the time, and that's important to recognize. So Molly, now that we are doing everything virtually, I'm thinking about these interviews that right now can't happen in person. So what tips do you have or ideas about how to have a good interview when you're either on the phone or Zoom, Skype, whatever?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I would say is everything that Jake said about the interview in terms of how to prepare for it, still do all those things. Even though you're in your home, you're in your bedroom, you're in your dining room, you still want to dress, nicely for the interview, especially if you're going to be on screen. If you have the opportunity and you have access to doing it in a Zoom or Skype or, Google Meetup, whatever it is, Teams setting, then I would say there's value there, because so much of a conversation is nonverbal communication. And so much of that comes through your expressions and your face. And as you can see, my hands moving because they never stop moving, the ways that you emote through body language. And so you can still get that across the screen. Yeah, it isn't the same for sure, but it really can be impactful in making a strong connection. On that note, I would say one of the things to think about is what space can I be in where there may be less distraction around me, and do I have any issues or concerns about background noise, my microphone. You can do a practice run with a friend or a family member if you feel like you want to. And then please know too that we are very understanding that sometimes things go awry, that we started a Zoom interview and then the internet cut and we couldn't reconnect. And so don't panic if that happens. We will completely understand that, and it is in no way your fault. But it's really valuable if in advance, you and the interviewer may do this already, they may initiate this, or you can, will say, okay, if something happens and we disconnect, what's the best way for me to reconnect with you? Is it email? Would you like me to call you? And what's the right way to reach out? And so have a little bit of a backup plan. You don't really need that when you're in person on campus, certainly, but over Zoom, over this technology, you certainly should think about having a good backup plan in place and feeling really well prepared.
That's great. I once heard an admissions counselor mention that the entire admissions process is a human process, right? And that means that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect all the time. There's not an expectation of perfection. Things can go awry and you can slip up, and it can be okay. It's not the end of the world. All right. Any additional thoughts, tips that anybody wants to share about successful interviews? Yes, Bruce.
As tough as this might be, and I just share this because it's happened, and I've been doing this long enough, and it's somewhat awkward, and it does happen often. But if there's disagreement in the car with a parent or parents, leave it in the car.
Mhm.
because in an interview, at least that's the way we conduct them, it's about 45 minutes with the student, and then we do invite a parent or both parents or a guardian, whoever's with the student, just to come in and recap and ask a few questions, and just as a way to say hello. And there have been instances in the past where you can cut the tension with a knife, that you can tell there's some animosity between student and parent or parents, and so it's sort of an overflow of what went on the way to campus. So um, try to avoid that.
Excellent, excellent tip. Yes, Jake.
Oh, I think Molly was about to say something. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Please go.
I'll go, Jake. All right, I'll make it easier for us. There's always that awkwardness across Zoom where you don't know who's going to go and when. So the thing I would say, I would add on to this, and that I would certainly encourage students to think about is some of this can feel potentially a little scary. There can be moments where you feel like you heard me say the word evaluative interview, and that kind of got you shaking a little bit, perhaps, and it shouldn't. Remember that this is conversational, and really, you're in control in terms of the answers that you give, and in terms of the way that you represent yourself and what you share with us. So I may open an interview asking you to talk a bit more about your summer or junior year, or tell me a bit about what brings you to campus today. An open-ended question is going to allow you to go a lot of different places, and every interview is going to be a bit different. So again, it'll shift from school to school and interviewer to interviewer. But in many cases, you really can have some great examples that demonstrate who you are and what you value, that you can adapt into an answer in an interview in many, many ways. So just think about what are those stories that really make you who you are, and the things that you want to make sure you share, and know that you're going to have plenty of space to do that in an interview.
Great, thank you. Jake.
Yeah, I would just add that, remember, etiquette is important in these situations. And certainly with a lot of admissions reps, I've never really heard the crazy kind of stories, but I know from my experience working with our alums, or even with a lot of institutions that use senior interns or current students as interviewers, like, remember that those people are also representing the institution and will expect a kind of professional and kind conversation. So it's always good to be aware of who you're interacting with. And just remember the little things, like if you have to cancel, to make sure you do that ahead of time. I would always recommend checking your email half an hour prior to the session, just to make sure you're caught up to date, not missing anything. All those good things they're just good habits to have as you prepare to do, frankly, probably quite a few interviews at different schools as you go throughout this process.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Thank you. All right, and I hear from Mrs. Toomey that we have a question.
Ew. Will schools be reviewing who is following the school and its organizations on social media?
That would be a lot of data to capture, I will say. And I was just, as I was about to answer, looking at Jake's face and thinking about the number of followers that any of these schools have, but thinking about Syracuse's size for sure, and Lehigh as well. No, that would not be something that that we would expect. And if Jake or Bruce have a different response, certainly they should answer differently. But we won't be capturing who's following which accounts. But it's a great way for you to just learn about the school. And if you want to mention it in an email, if it comes up naturally in conversation, there you go.
One thing I learned about recently is on Instagram, you can search for a geotag. And a counselor recommended that students search for a geotag of like Dickinson College, right? And then you can see if a student is public, sort of what they're posting, and get a real sense of what students are doing when they're on campus, right? And it goes back in history. So even before students had to leave campus because of the virus, you can see back in February, what were they doing? What were they talking about? What were the big events on campus? It was an interesting suggestion.
That's a great suggestion. And it's a great place. And that question's excellent, because it's such a good place to find content that you're not finding on the website.
Mm-hmm. Right. You know, that insider perspective, for sure. All right. Any other questions? Give it a second. Any other tips, ideas, thoughts that our panelists want to share?
I would only share with all of you that an investigation partly involves an admissions office for obvious reasons and for the reasons that we've shared today. But at the same time, I also find value when students go into an admissions office, listen to the info session, take the tour, maybe do the interview, do all the things and that you feel comfortable with. But if you have an opportunity to walk around campus almost incognito and sort of eavesdrop on some conversations or have lunch in the commons or approach some students and ask them why they're, where else did you apply and are you happy and what's your relationship like with fellow students and faculty, etc. That's where the true authenticity of a college campus, I believe, rests. That admissions officers and guilty, but we are sort of the people who are promoting the institution. I think there's not an admissions office out there that's trying to bait people into applying for admissions, although that's a different subject. But I think we all do our job with a high degree of ethical standards. And sometimes the places that you visit and see are not the right school for you, and you'll make that decision. But I do think there's value in literally interacting by yourself or maybe with a parent on that campus. Maybe try to sit in on a class or go to the library. As I said before, eavesdrop on some conversations because you'll probably hear something that's related to that person's experience that could be really helpful in helping you to understand. And I think most of the students on our campuses are more than eager to share their experiences and the highs and the sometimes the lows, because not every place is sunshine and rainbows. Colleges work. You know that because you're at Hill, and you understand that. But it's not all admissions.
And there are ways to engage on a college campus that it doesn't have anything to do with admissions. You can, for example, Muhlenberg College has a great theater program. I love attending their performances and I get to see current students and do exactly what Bruce is talking about. Eavesdrop, get a sense of the student body. You can attend sporting events. That also is a great way to understand, especially if you're at Syracuse University, right? To feel the school spirit and to see what that experience is like more from that current student's perspective. I think that's really valid. I also really love to, when I'm on a college campus, walk the perimeter of the campus to sort of see what it looks like from an outsider's perspective, and also to see, where would I like to eat? What are my options there? So I think those are all really good points. Thank you for sharing that, Bruce. All right. Molly, did you have something you wanted to add to that? No.
I don't know. I think that is the most perfect piece of advice to kind of set you off in thinking about how to really learn about a school.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, do we have another question? No? Okay. All right. Excellent. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists. I really, really appreciate you taking the time today and joining us and sharing your expertise. It is just really appreciated. I said before this call, during this virus, I've been amazed at the ways in which colleges have pivoted and are offering such great programming online and did so really quickly and really thoughtfully. So thank you for all of that work. And thank you for being here today. It's much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep, of course. You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Yes. All right. And this is a good point. Here is the contact information for our panelists. If anyone wants to I did get their approval to share their email addresses. So you can jot those down and look at the beautiful pictures of their campuses. Hopefully we can all visit soon, right? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and late afternoon.
Take care.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.